Okay. Thanks, everybody. Next is the long-awaited panel of the day, for me anyway. I am really excited to get to introduce some wonderful people that are here with us today and have done so much to support the issue of immigration reform and really have stood out as examples and courageous leaders on the issue. And I would like to introduce Attorney General of Utah, Mark Shurtleff, who has had many accomplishments while serving as Attorney General, which include establishing Utah's Amber Alert, the first statewide child abduction response team, and identity theft database. He previously served as an officer and attorney in the U.S. Navy Judge Advocate General, JAG Corps, Assistant Attorney General, and Deputy County Attorney for Salt Lake County. His service has been recognized with many awards, including the 2005 Utah Protector of Children Award, the 2006 Humanitarian of the Year Award, and the Order of the Aztec Eagle. And on a personal note, I just want to say I have admired your work from afar. Here in Indiana, another idea that we stole from Utah is the Utah Compact. And so I from afar, very much admired the work that Utah has done on this issue, and we actually did our own version of the Utah Compact here in Indiana called the Indiana Compact, which helped us a great deal last legislative session to manage to water down a very nasty immigration bill. And also want to say a special word of thanks to our own Indiana Attorney General Greg Zeller, who's here on the panel today, who also has been a very courageous leader in this area and has faced a tough battle this year with regard to this issue. So thank you very much to both of you for being leaders. And with that, go ahead.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you. Good to be with you here today. And there was a question or two of Grover Norquist dealing with this issue that we all face, and that is a constant refrain from the anti-immigration folks, the Tea Party, the Minutemen, and so forth, and that is, what don't you understand about illegal, right? We get that all the time. Illegal is illegal. We're a rule of law nation. And how can you, Attorney General Shurtleff, not be supportive of rounding them up and shipping them all out? If the federal government won't do their job, you're a law enforcement official in Utah, it's your job to do it. And if you won't do it, the chief needs to do it, and the sheriff needs to do it. And we're here to say today, obviously, that most law enforcement are not Joe Arpaio. Most law enforcement are very dedicated and committed to their sworn duty, and that is to uphold the law, the Constitution of the United States and the laws and constitutions of our respective states. That's what we're sworn to do. And so how does this play into it when you have this movement of people saying we need to toughen up the laws to get people to self-deport or to round them up and deport them ourselves by cracking down with really strict law enforcement related laws like Arizona 1070 and other states that came after. And how does law enforcement feel about that? Well, in Utah, as soon as 1070 passed and suddenly the right wing of my party, and we're Utah just north of Arizona, they ran out and said, we're going to get all the people from Arizona up here now, and we have to do exactly the same thing in Utah. We in law enforcement, initially, that's who I was talking to. I wasn't yet talking to the chambers and the faith-based communities. It was about, wait a minute, we don't want, our officers, the vast majority, do not want to become ICE agents. This is not our responsibility. We're very busy doing our job. Not only that, ultimately we feel, in a way, and you're going to hear this, I think, today, hopefully, that I heard, that in fact, these type of laws, these punitive, run-them-out laws, are actually harmful to overall public safety, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that today. And so we in law enforcement got very busy and then engaged with other like-minded people like we have here today to change that mentality in Utah and to go from this tough enforcement-only kind of approach to back off on that, and if we're going to do something, let's try more comprehensive, pragmatic, reasonable, compassionate solutions and Utah Compact. And we're just glad to see this thing spreading. So today, it's a great honor for me to, by the way, I'm 12 years now as Attorney General almost, and I'm finishing in a few months. I love this job. Greg, is it a great job? I should say General. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I think the greatest honor I've had is working with men and women in law enforcement in the state of Utah and throughout this country for their dedicated service. So it's an honor to introduce, and I'm not going to go through their bios because you have them right here, but to my immediate left is Sheriff Mark Curran from Lake County, Illinois. I will say that he has served in criminal justice at the local, county, state, and federal levels, and can give you that perspective. And then seated obviously in the middle is Attorney General Greg Zeller. He was the chief deputy. I knew him as Steve Carter's chief deputy. Steve Carter and I came in as AGs together. Got to know the guys who, and we all know as AGs who really does the work. That's our chief deputies and the folks under us. And so it was, Greg moved right in 4 years ago, and not only as a leader in the state, but he is well known nationally and regionally for leadership on big issues, most recently being a huge leader nationwide on this issue of child sexual slavery. And so I really appreciate, and he's taught me about hospitality here, I'll tell you that. And finally on the left we have Chief James Hawkins from Garden City, Kansas. A lifetime career in law enforcement, from a street officer on the street all the way up through significant training and education to now I think 15 or 16 years, something like that, as chief of police. So with that, I've asked each one of them, let's just start right here with you, Sheriff, just a brief kind of statement about law enforcement related matters when it comes to immigration reform. Thank you.
Let me just say that I was at one time on the other side of the issue. I had applied for 287G status, had been a prosecutor at the county, state, and federal level, believed very much in the rule of law, and thought, you know, the law is the law, and ultimately somebody has to enforce it. Otherwise, our nation has no hope. But as I delved deeper into the situation and I saw that essentially the law wasn't enforced forever, we needed the labor force, so we had wide open borders, and we had no interest. And then all of a sudden, after years of people coming into this country, we wanted to deport them and break up families. Well, let me just say this much. I'm somebody that believes that your faith should carry over in all of the roles that you have in life, including as sheriff. So if I believe in the sanctity of human life, I want a consistent ethic of life, including how I treat immigrants. I want to be equitable in that process. If I believe in a nuclear family, then I don't want to arbitrarily break up a mother and a father that are trying to raise their children. And so as I dealt with these issues, I didn't like myself on the other side of the issue, because I knew all the truths were on the side of embracing immigration reform, moving in that direction, and being fair about it.
General?
Well, I'll say the immigration debate was not something that I sought out, but it came to our state. And it's one that, you know, a bill was proposed, and I respect the fact that, you know, the failure of the federal government, we can all agree, has led us to this position. And we noted that there were hundreds of bills in states around the country where states were looking at what is our responsibility with the failure of the federal government. So I've never been critical of the states in engaging in this, but some of the real questions, the constitutional questions, particularly the one that really stuck out, was the warrantless arrest power, which, again, my role as Attorney General, particularly with the legislators, is to give counsel behind closed doors. And I've never in my career spoke publicly on a subject that was subject to a legislative debate against a bill. And I didn't in this one, but in standing up for the compact, it was represented that I was against what's now Senate Bill 590. But what I always pointed out is that the reason that I thought it was important to stand up was not to object to a bill being introduced. I would never have to want to object to something that I may, and in this case am, defending in court. But to stand up for something else was really meant to focus on one specific thing. All of the efforts to go around to states, very concerted efforts to bring the enforcement issue to state legislators, really misrepresented to the public at large that these debates should be taking on a state nature, instead of keeping the focus where it should be, which is the federal government, who has tried desperately to avoid the subject. So the reason I felt it was my obligation to stand up for something else, not against the bill that I'm defending, but I was for keeping the focus where it rightly belongs and is constitutionally structured to be the Congress, which has all failed us miserably. So the men and women in law enforcement deserve better than to be put in front of the bus when in fact that bus should be aimed right at Congress.
Thank you. Chief?
Well, I feel obligated to tell you where Garden City, Kansas is, because most of you probably are saying, where the hell is that?
It's the garden spot.
We are 83 miles south of I-70. We are 70 miles east of the Colorado border, 70 miles north of the Oklahoma border, and 70 miles west of a little village that claims to be the boyhood home of the discoverer of Pluto, and you all know how that worked out. Garden City is roughly 55% Hispanic now. I am not a native of Garden City, nor of Kansas, so I think I can look at it a little more objectively than some. But it's about 55% Hispanic now. We have the school district reports to speak 23 different languages, and in a community of 30,000 documented residents, I think that's pretty significant. So these immigration issues do affect us. We are hugely diverse when it comes to ethnicity, and we as a police department think that everybody should be treated fairly, equitably, regardless of your immigration status.
Chief, thank you. That actually leads into my first question for you. By the way, if you have questions, you can either write them down and let Carter over there, the Hook'em Horns guy, Pat, to pick them up, and we'll make sure we get your questions in if we can. That is this question of policing. You know, there was only 20, 30, 40 years ago, the theory of policing was, hey, folks, stay in your house and lock your doors. We, the cops, will keep you safe. And obviously that wasn't working as well as when they started this concept of community policing, where the officers are in the community, you get to know who you're dealing with, the demographics, the people, get their trust, and then get their help and cooperation. And so my question, I guess, is to this, and maybe, if, again, going into some of your demographics and so forth, what harm you see a enforcement-only, tough, punitive type law will do to either the idea of community-oriented policing or just the concept of general public safety in your communities? Whoever wants to start, go for it. General, you look like you may want to have something.
I'll start. I think you know, the state of Indiana is not the same throughout our 92 counties. Much like all the other states, there's quite a bit of regional and specific differences. So the law enforcement being put into this awkward position really are going to go in two different directions. I mean, some in communities that have large immigrant populations and may have a large presence of immigrants on the law enforcement force itself would take one approach, and then you'd have the approach in where there's a much less population of immigrants, or let's say it's all a homogenous kind of. So you'll end up putting law enforcement into the position where they will be constantly challenged for having racially profiled a defendant. They'll constantly be challenged in court and under valid constitutional claims that they had discriminated based on what they saw the nature of the defendant, so his race, his ethnic origin. You're going to put this constant claim in front of the public every day. And I think it really does, again, it's this disservice to the men and women who protect and defend us to be in that position where they're going to constantly be challenged, on the one hand being duty bound to do what they're told, on the other every day to have to read in the newspaper and get the word out to the communities that they serve that they're somehow being discriminatory in the exercise of enforcement of law. It's untenable.
Thank you.
I would
Sheriff?
say, essentially, I'm Irish, there's a Celtic saying, never give a man a sword until you teach him how to dance. You don't want police walking around with the chip on their shoulders, this is the law, hostility towards immigrant groups, and you set the tone by being the sheriff. And when you're out there saying, you know, things that they can interpret as having a harsh position towards certain groups, they're going to follow suit. So you want to be very, very careful with that. Also, you know, having been of Irish ancestry, I can tell you what the Irish were like when my ancestors came here early in the 20th century, that they were stuck together. I mean, they knew each other in the old country and they stuck together here. It's similar with today's immigrant groups. So if they think the police is out there to get them, that they're unfair, that they're just arbitrarily grabbing people and putting them in holding cells so they can get sent back and broken up from their family, then there will be no relations. And if you really want to keep the larger communities safe as well, you have to have community policings, as General Shurtleff said. You have to have that ability to walk in there, have a relationship with these people. Well, they'll tell you where the bad guy is, or where he went, or what they saw, or who did what. And that's critical, I think, in terms of the larger picture.
I agree. I think that you have to establish a positive relationship with your community, or you are not going to be able to solve the crimes and issues. When I first moved to Garden City, the major population was Caucasian, non-Hispanic, but there were a lot of Hispanics who had been coming in since the early 1900s. We had about a 5% Asian population at the time. There were Vietnamese, Lao, Cambodians, and they were a very difficult group to gain confidence with because they felt, and they came from a country where the police wasn't respected, and so we worked very, very hard to gain their respect and gain their confidence so that they would in turn report crimes that your average longtime citizen felt no compunction about reporting. And to undo that now after 30 years would be disastrous, I think.
Let me say from our own experience in Utah, because we do support the rule of law, and we have some criminal aliens in our states who are here to commit crime. And they're gang bangers or drug dealers, human traffickers, gun dealers. I mean, we know they're manufacturing meth. They're illegal, they're criminal, they commit crimes, and those are the ones who are making our entire populations unsafe. So we formed a strike force called the Criminal Alien Strike Force and got funding for it to just go after those bad people. And I'll tell you, 90% of our confidential informants are also otherwise undocumented immigrants because they live in these neighborhoods, they know these people, they're the first ones to be victimized, and so they want to cooperate, they want to clean up their streets, they want to cooperate with law enforcement, but all acting very nervous that if my officers or the county deputies, sheriffs, or city police are working on our strike force or suddenly now ICE agents, they won't talk to them anymore. And that's a grave concern. Now there's a follow-up question here by a member of the audience here about what is the right level of local cooperation with ICE? 287G, I mean, what is the cooperation and what is, in your opinion, the right amount of that type of collaboration?
Well, I would say that it's at this point where we have a broken system that nobody has any interest in fixing, it is at a bare minimum. You do as little as you're absolutely required to. You don't apply for any special task forces. You don't, other than the bare minimum that you're mandated to do. That's, in my opinion, you wouldn't want to go beyond it because you want to force the hand of those out there that we have immigration reform. And as long as there's mass deportations in huge numbers, there's no incentive.
Jump right in if you.
Well, the one part that on the warrantless arrests, we have taken a position on that deals with the ICE. When there's a federal hold out there, we still maintain the right that our law enforcement should hold the defendants pending an ICE review, because we do think that there's an obligation on the part of law enforcement if and when there's been federal action. So there's an open question as to whether there still has to be a warrant issued But I think we're willing to take the next step to say even where there's a 24-hour hold, we'll at least do that, which again, I know it offends some sense of individual liberties to be held pending a federal review. But we'll still maintain that level of it. Again, it's still going to be subject to a court review.
And I think that if a serious felony is committed and the suspect is incarcerated, then we can check into their status as just a matter of course in the investigation. Your average traffic stop, I don't really care whether or not you're a citizen, whether you're here legally or illegally. What I care about is, do you have a driver's license that's valid, and do you have insurance? And other than that, your immigration status or your citizenship status is of little consequence.
That's interesting. We, in Utah, one of the few states who have what's called the driver's privilege card. For a time, we gave regular driver's licenses even if you were undocumented. Based on a lot of pressure, they wanted to do away with that. Many of us stood up and said, well, in law enforcement, again, law enforcement, public safety, if they're going to be here and driving, and they are until we resolve the issue, I guess, let's at least have them take a test and have ID and an address and a picture, and also carry insurance, which 85% of those who have driver's privilege cards do have insurance. And so I guess, and with our officers, since it looks a little different, it's turned sideways, the question was, well, when you pull someone over and they hand that as their ID, which basically says, I am in your state and in country in an undocumented status, what do you do about that? And until we're forced by a law that requires our officers then to detain and to check out their status on the side of the road or so forth, or to transport, they don't. They, as Chief says, their job is to keep the street safe and make sure that if you cite them and release them and they move on their way. What roles do you, well, let me just ask this, because Secure Communities has been an issue. The Secure Communities is a federal program that has worked with local communities. It's, the question is, how did Secure Communities become part of all counties in Indiana, if that's true? And what are the ways, is it resulting in too quick arrests, deportations, and so forth, in deportation proceedings? What's the experience been here with that, or in Indiana, or in Illinois, or Kansas, for that matter? Greg, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Well, we've not had a lot of interaction on this. I mean, we do have it in all the 92 counties, but the local involvement is still pretty minimal. It's not something that comes up other than from time to time, but it's always coupled with other issues. So we've not even seen it as challenges in court. So I think even the public is probably unaware of some of that involvement.
Yeah, in Illinois, we have it mandated as well. We participate. There's counties that, in violation of what has been mandated, are not participating. I have not chosen to do that. You have an oath, and in my discernment, that the right thing to do is to cooperate on that minimal level. With regards to Secure Communities, though, prior to Secure Communities, I was observant of who we were deporting and for what offenses. Once Secure Communities came into status, I don't think it changed at all. But Secure Communities is the boogeyman in a lot of communities where people are seeing their relatives deported, and they think it's as a result of Secure Communities. It has a huge public PR problem. I have spoken to the leaders of, the director of Secure Communities, and in essence asked them to be much more transparent, because word will spread that so-and-so got deported for this minor offense, and by their lack of transparency, that seems to be what's believed.
I really don't have anything to add to that.
This is an interesting question that, and I'm not sure this applies, because in Utah, if Greg mentioned this, that when you do bring someone in and on an arrest, and you book them into jail, and then you determine that they are in an unauthorized status, you notify ICE, and you hold them for 24 hours, 48 hours. And in our case, generally speaking, if it's not a violent crime, they don't come pick them up. We have no federal holding facilities in Utah, and so we let them out in 48 hours. But there's this question about talking about what the author of this question is talks about the prison industrial complex. In other words, that there's a feeling that there is there is so much money to be made in prison industries that you see that they play a role in the surge of 1070 type laws. Is this in order to fill beds and therefore, help the budget in the county by building more county facilities? I haven't personally seen that. Is that something that you see or are concerned about? As far as
Well, I think human beings are subject to all evils, whether it's pride, lust, envy, greed, and clearly that is going to be a motivating factor for some people in prison industry, the opportunity to make money off of human beings. We're going to build a detention center in Crete. ICER was instrumental in blocking that. I supported their attempts to block it, and we were able to alleviate that. We don't need more detention centers, certainly not for immigrants. We're hitting record deportation numbers every year, so anybody that tells you that we need one, that we don't need to have any higher deportation level numbers. We need to fix the system as it exists. The only thing, I think Cook County is the only one that doesn't participate in secure communities.
any additional comments on that or thoughts?
Well, we don't, fortunately, municipal police don't get involved in incarceration other than we pass them off to our local sheriff, which is a great thing. But the cost of holding people who are merely here illegally would be prohibitive in our county. I mean, if we were to round up everyone who is undocumented in our community and put them in a secure facility in our county, that would be prohibitive, but we just wouldn't be able to handle that.
Well, and I would add, if you're looking at it as an economic motivator, the owner and the managers of the facilities that might have an economic interest in housing more people might be countered by the millions of people who have to pay taxes to support the cost of that. So I think the economics is really on the other side, that there's not a huge demand really to pay more taxes. I think Grover might have said that once upon a time.
We're getting near the end of our time, but let me just ask this. I mean, stay on the same topic of if you're required to, based on reasonable suspicion under an Arizona law or Alabama law, or a probable cause arrest for a felony in Utah, and then the requirement that you then determine their status. And some states require you to do that on the roadside and hold them on the roadside until you're able to determine that, and then determine whether they have to transport. What does that do to effective policing? What is your normal routine and traffic stops and so forth? And then if you do have to transport, take your cops off the street for however long that takes to book them and so forth, what does that do to their regular responsibility as far as being on the streets? Chief?
Well, your average traffic stop is less than 10 minutes long. I mean, to stop someone for speeding, write them a citation and tell them to have a good day takes less than 10 minutes. But if we were to stop and ask everybody their citizenship status, and if we had to detain everyone, especially in Garden City, on suspicion of being in this country illegally, it would take officers off of the streets for hours while they were processing these folks. And that's just not something we have the manpower to do.
There is this, a lot of the misinformation that was used behind a 1070 and other laws, and there was a lot, as you know, but one of them was that you hear a lot about, and you see it all over the internet, that 80%, 85% or more of the crimes are committed by Latinos or undocumented immigrants. What has been your experience in that? Have you seen any studies? I know in Utah we are currently studying. We actually have one coming out pretty soon. But what has been your experience? Do they commit crime at a higher rate than other members of your communities?
No, in Lake County, Latinos are 21% of the county, Lake County, Illinois, approximately 800,000 people. Latinos are a smaller percentage of the crime than is reflective of their overall numbers. What happens, though, is they get picked up on an offense for which everyone else is going to be able to post bond, but ICE puts a hold on them because they don't have legal status. And so it skews their numbers in the jail, and then they make up a much higher percentage of your jail than is reflective of the actual crime rate.
In Indiana, we recently had a Pew Center on the State's study of our prison population, so it didn't really have a significant percentage. So I think the answer is clearly no. But just from a logical perspective, you can look at certain types of crimes that might be more targeted toward the immigrant community. So human trafficking, for instance, you'll see people involved in that are probably going to be undocumented because they're bringing in young girls from other countries. Some of the drug trade that comes up from Mexico or through Central America, some of those are going to have a higher number. So I think there are certain types of crimes that are primarily going to be based on an immigrant population, but it's not an overall significant population on just crime generally.
We keep a monthly report on activity, and it tells us ethnicity, race, religious inclination or dress, and gender of everyone who we stop in a traffic stop. And even in a community of our proportions, they usually run 50-50, minorities versus non-minority contacts. Crimes are usually committed by the same people every month. It's not necessarily based on race or ethnicity. It's a recidivism issue where we have the same repeat offenders every month.
Thank you. We have just a little bit of time, a couple more questions. There seems to be a lot of concern about ICE, and I'm not sure you can answer these, but if you can, that is, I mean, and we probably ought to have a federal official here, but questions about if the community can have access to ICE data, information about arrests and individuals and so forth. And then someone had a comment here that it says we have a jailhouse, Tajma, T-A-J-M-A, I don't know which state we're talking about. It's where, here in Indiana? Okay. And ICE paying the mortgage on the jailhouse. Have you seen that in your states, or? No. And our 300, are they all federal criminals, federal charges, but you say there are a number of undocumented there for no other reason other than they're documented? Serious charges, right. We have of all our counties, we have 19 counties in Utah, and only 2 of our county jails have contracted with the federal government as holding, and so they do get paid.
Right.
Actually, they pay better than the state
Right.
reimburses them for state prisoners.
Absolutely.
Did you see that happen in some of yours? And
Yeah, there's a county that neighbors us that has a contract with ICE, and as General Shurtleff said, the rate of reimbursement is substantial. So it's tough when you're, looking at needing new squads and what have you, and ICE comes in here and offers you all this money to be a detention center.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your county commissioners, your elected officials trying to balance the budget, they're seeing that as a cash flow, and so they need to hear opposition from those who elect them, I would think, if they have a concern about that, say it shouldn't be just about the money, the bottom line. Sir, why don't you just go ahead and ask your question, because we're out of time. Just so everybody can hear the questions, when an officer pulls over a car, can he ask everybody in the car for their citizenship status? Everybody, passengers in your states?
No, we don't even ask anyone what their citizenship is. We don't want to get involved in that. We can ask for identification, but citizenship is of no interest to us.
Similarly.
There are states who are passing those, not only a requirement that you determine the driver's status, who you pull over for whatever offense, but also will allow you to detain, or require you to detain passengers and determine all of their status. And I'll tell you, as that's now finally, the Supreme Court, as you know, allowed Arizona to go forward with their show me your papers, they call it that, their determination based on reasonable suspicion. That was just to allow them because it had only been challenged as a facial challenge to the constitutionality. Now, as applied, now that we have cops actually stopping people and asking them and holding them, there will be a number, if not already, of lawsuits filed on as applied, alleging violations of civil rights, profiling, and so forth. Even though many of these laws say, you know, you have reasonable suspicion in the country illegally, but you can't consider, you can't profile. But then the police officer going, no, so what am I supposed to use to determine whether there's suspicion they're here? So it kind of as a wrap up, let's just quickly run through and see if there's, you know, what role should law enforcement play as far as speaking out, being playing in the states and maybe even nationally on immigration reform. Let's just leave it at that. If you have any suggestions or ideas, we'll conclude with that.
Well, I think we should encourage or discourage anything that would lean towards racial profiling. And let's face it, if in my community, even folks who have lived there all their lives, if they happen to be Hispanic and don't have their driver's license with them, who are we going to ask about citizenship versus who we're not going to ask? And I think anything that smacks of racial or ethnic profiling should be discouraged.
I would just say also that I think that all these issues are intertwined. That's the beauty of today, is that, you know, faith and economics, because we're on the winning side of all these arguments. Faithful Muslims, faithful Jews, faithful Christians, it doesn't matter, faithful Mormons. Sheriff Arpaio, when I was on the wrong side of this issue, I remember reading his book that he was an altar boy, and I asked him about that. He said he stopped going to church years and years ago because the priest was beating him up on the immigration issues. So I think that ultimately those of us that, you know, believe that we're all connected, what have you, recognize that we're on the winning side of this for so many different reasons.
Well, I think the respect I have for the men and women who serve in our law enforcement is such that you have to really recognize their role in trying to be part of the community. So whether they look out and see undocumented workers, that's not really any violation of our state statutes. They're part of our community, and the law enforcement really have to develop a mutual respect. That respect is not really born of focusing on federal violations. It's really born of this need to protect the community as a whole. So we have people who target the immigrant populations because they're vulnerable. They will not talk to law enforcement, and we need to really arm the law enforcement with better relationships so that whether it's drug dealers that are working in a community or people who have human trafficking issues that are immigrants, we really need to develop a stronger relationship, and that has to be built on mutual respect to one another. And that's not going to come with a focus on some problems that are more directed in Washington's failure to really help us with this.
Thank you very much. Let me just conclude and piggyback on that by saying, you know who are talking to these youth? I mean, in Utah, Latinos may be 12% of the population by census, but almost 70% of gang members, criminal gang members, are Hispanic kids in Utah. So if the kids, and they're being told every day by gang members around them, your parents are here undocumented or illegal, white society considers them criminal, they're going to punish them, you're a criminal, you can't succeed in this community, the only way you succeed is by sticking together with the Sarreños or the Norteños or whatever. That's the only way you succeed. And when we rob those kids of hope, if we don't give them opportunities, if law enforcement then is suddenly seen as the enemy, instead of working there with basketball leagues and getting all these kids and encouraging them to stay away from drugs and out of gangs and stay in school and learn English, then overall these kids will not have a chance. And there's plenty of people waiting who will talk to them and lead them down the wrong path. So we're delighted to be a part of this ongoing discussion. The law enforcement public safety issues are behind everything, including in-state tuition. It's why we continue to have in-state tuition, because we want to continue to give these kids hope in the future. And so with that, we want to thank you. Please thank the panel for their service and protecting, and just say, be safe, guys, be safe out there. Thank you. That, just want to come right up, Ali, and we're not going to take a break, right? Let's just go right into our conclusions. Let these gentlemen have a seat.
What, I can't be Mark Shurtleff? So, long day. people who traveled from 10 states across the Midwest. We've got Manuel Cunha here from the Central Valley of California. We've got M.N. Cawthorn and his colleagues here from Alabama. And we've covered a lot of ground. I think it's clear that if you hold a Bible, if you wear a badge, or if you own a business, you really, really, really want a common sense solution to the immigration system. So after this long day, I think what can we look back and learn? Well, for myself, I've learned that, yes, the Midwest is the best region in the country. And I've also learned that there's a difference between Hoosier hospitality and Boilermaker hospitality, or they're one and the same, but you just have to be careful where you say it. But I've also learned that we have really a great, great friend and a great champion here in Attorney General Greg Zeller. He's a person that we've had the opportunity to work with over the last couple of years every now and then, and his staff and his leadership in pulling together today, but also his vision for how Indiana law enforcement treats immigrants is just it's an example that we hold up across the country, and of course our friend Utah Attorney General Mark Shurtleff. I also want to thank Angela Adams for being a great MC for the day. Can we give her a round of applause? But after a long day, we know one thing. This is a tough issue, right? It didn't get any easier today. But we also know that we're not alone. So in the past, we'd ask, you business owner X, can you get out there and talk about, the need for immigration reform? Well, after today, business owners can say, sure, because standing next to me will be a pastor, a police chief, or we can ask a police chief to stand up. And they'll say, well, this is who I'm going to be standing with. So it's this idea and this reality that there are different constituencies, there are different leaders who are looking for the same solutions. And each one of us can speak to our communities, our audiences, in a very unique language, in a very powerful language, in a way that resonates, in a way that people can understand. Because as Grover put it, this isn't about what we say to our communities only. It's not just about that, but it's also about what we say to our elected officials. So, this is the third summit that we've done. We did the first one in Utah about a year ago, where we, had leadership from Idaho, Wyoming, and Colorado in for a one-day meeting in Utah. Then in June of this year, we did one in Atlanta, where we had leadership from these three constituencies, from the Carolinas, from Alabama, from Florida, and from Tennessee. And then today from 10 states across the Midwest. I'm going to tell you a quick story about after that meeting in the Southeast, in Atlanta. There's later that week, there was a meeting with a senator from Texas. There's only two of them. You can just pick one. And it was amazing because in that conversation, the person who was talking, he came and he was in Atlanta. And you know what he said? He said, Senator, I was with Larry Wooten of the North Carolina Farm Bureau. I was with Chief John King of Doraville, Georgia. And Senator, you were putting them in an untenable situation until we fix the immigration system. So all of a sudden in that one conversation, Senator Cornyn realized it wasn't just about the law enforcement community. It wasn't just about business. It wasn't just about the faith community, but it was about all these different communities who were conservatives, who were his base, his community, saying, we got to fix this, and we got to take advantage of whatever opportunity comes up to fix it. And we believe at the forum that the opportunity coming up is going to be in 2013. Because based on all the hard work that we've done today, all the hard work leading up to today, whether it's in this region or in other regions, that on December 4th, we're going to be able to tell the new Congress, the new administration, whoever just won, that there is a new consensus on immigrants in America. And our expectation is that whoever just won must represent that consensus. So we hope that you're going to join us on the 4th for a strategy session. It's not going to be, straight ahead, this is what we're doing. This is going to be a strategy session. We're going to sit down, we're going to roll up our sleeves, and we're going to think about, okay, how do we move a message? How do we change the culture in our states so that members of Congress are hearing from their constituents? And that's a really important moment. And then on December 5th, we're all going to head up to the Congress and head over to the administration and have conversations. And tell them that in 2013, when they start the 113th Congress, when the next administration steps into their role, it's our expectation that they move immigration reform forward. And that's a huge responsibility that all of us own together, and it's a huge responsibility that we are really, really, really proud to work on with you. So, 3 summits, Mountain West, Southeast, Midwest, 3 compacts. We haven't even mentioned the Indiana Compact. I mean, the Indiana Compact followed the Utah Compact and did such an incredible job of just starting to change the debate here in the Midwest. So there's 3 compacts: Utah, Indiana, Iowa. The evangelical community, the Catholic community, the Jewish community have all been doing incredible work. So I hope we all leave today with a sense of energy, a sense of enthusiasm, because it's about Bibles, badges, and business, folks. It's easy to say, it's easy to remember, and it's about who we are. It's about everybody in this room taking a stand, taking a role in pushing our members of Congress and our nation forward to fix the immigration system. So we will see everybody in December. Thank you again very much for coming today. There's now a tour of the Lucas Oil Stadium if you're interested. Guthrie is going to be helping with that tour because he's awfully excited to take the tour. And we'll follow up with everybody very, very shortly. But again, thank you very much and have a wonderful weekend.